Hi everybody, here we are again. Welcome to Square the Circle Music channel. We're talking about circles and squares again tonight. And of course, music appreciation. Tonight's list is not really a list again. I just wanted to go over maybe a few things. Let's go into a little bit of the week at large. I got run ragged at work like I usually do. Also, I got Pfizered. So that's good news, right? Everybody should be getting vaccinated. I I felt like most people do. Got the chills, got the body aches, felt like dog shit, like to be expected for like the first 18 hours. Started to feel better, and then I felt great for like 2 days. The weather here in Oregon has been like absolutely astoundingly gorgeous for April. We had one of the driest Marches we've ever had on record. Sunny, not really warm, but sunny and beautiful. And then April's been the same way. So I got that COVID shot, and then I started feeling better the day and a half later, and then I started like doing tons of gardening and stuff. And then after like 2 more days, then I started feeling really shitty again. My head has been floating 6 feet above my neck, and so I didn't really have a lot of time or wherewithal this week to really curate like a really fabulous list. Not that this isn't a great pile of stuff here, but I just didn't have like I said, the wherewithal to get really super creative with it this week. So please forgive me for if it seems like I'm kind of just kind of winging it here, but that's kind of what I'm always doing, right? Mage is always just winging it. So I hope everybody else had a wonderful week. Let's talk about some music, shall we? I'd like to go over 10 picks. I think I picked 10, roughly 10, of stuff I've been listening to this year. May it be some new releases, may it be stuff that's kind of like oldie but goodie, stuff that I've just been like kind of really playing, heavily and really hitting it hard, and reminiscing and getting back into like some old stuff that I used to love, and just like stuff that has been gracing the turntable a lot more than some of the other pieces in my collection. I just wanted to share them with you and how I feel about them, and maybe even give you a little bit of new little bits and pieces of stuff to look at. So I'll get right into it. This is a very recent release, just popped out. His name is what? Osamu Sato. Osamu Sato. This is a collection of, it's called Selected Ambient Grooves from the years 1993 through, what is it? I believe 2001? Yeah, 1993 to 2001. Obviously a Japanese gentleman putting out some awesome ambient groove music. This is stuff that is not just what you'd classify as kind of your, typical, what you'd expect of, Japanese ambient music. It's not just real subtle, real minimalistic kind of background environmental sounds. There is quite a bit of that. But this is coming from the 90s and early 2000s, so it's also mixed up with quite a bit of like modern day kind of almost DJ stylings and mixed up groove music, stuff that you could like reminiscent of like guys that were mixing and spinning and mashing for like the Beastie Boys and stuff like that. That's kind of what it reminds me of, is that early 90s to mid 90s kind of sound, DJ Shadow and like that kind of stuff. I don't know a whole lot about that era and that culture and that style. I don't particularly like hip hop. Go ahead and throw stones, throw rotten fruit at me. That's fine. Not a hater. I didn't hop aboard that train when I should have. Way back when. Of course, it was hugely popular when I was growing up. Early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, and all the kids were jumping on board. I didn't, for some reason. It didn't grab hold. Didn't grab a hold of me like it did most people, and then I just kind of like never kept going with it. So enough of all that though. But that's what the vibes I'm getting from this. It's kind of like that early '90s, when hip hop was getting, incredibly creative. It wasn't just kind of like what you were hearing, from certain aspects and cultures and street culture or city urban culture, that kind of thing. It was getting a little bit more, mixing it up with all sorts of different flavors and different textures and different inspirations. And so this guy grabbed hold of that and took what he was had learned and what he knows about classical piano and his training with minimalistic sounds and ambient, and just kind of started making all kinds of really cool psychedelic fun shit to listen to. There's, like I said, there's still some very ambient chill moments in here where you feel like you're listening to like Hiroshi Yoshimura, that very kind of like Rhodes piano, minimalistic, and then the next track you feel like you're listening to some modern day super cool funky hip hop shit. It's really cool. Beautiful cover art. Yeah, this was just kind of like a blind buy at my record store, and if I see beautiful artwork and then it's laced with the word ambient sounds, I'm like, okay, that's for me. It's got to be for me. And sure is. Osamu Sato, Collected Ambient Grooves, 93 to 2001. Recent release, came out, I believe, just this last in the last couple weeks. So everybody ought to get out and get this. It's a fantastic listen. So, all right. Next on the list of things I wanted to show you that has been gracing my turntable quite a bit for the last few weeks. I really, here at the end of the winter, going into the spring feels, when everything starts popping and everything really starts to rejuvenate, rebirth, everything's coming alive again. One of my very, very favorite times of the year, of course, here in Oregon too. It's just like everything is just turning bright. Kelly green, evergreen, all the blossoms are popping out and just accentuating this just like crazy landscape of just every shade of green you can possibly imagine. And suddenly you're starting to see all these pinks and whites and yellows, and it's just fantastic. And it just puts a smile on everyone's face. The people who aren't allergy sufferers, of course, anyone that suffers from seasonal allergies, may it be tree pollen or grass pollen, you probably should never come here. Some of the highest pollen counts on the globe, and people who have issues with that are just walking around, just eyes are just gushing down their faces. Face bright red. People are so miserable this time of year. I feel so awful for them, but I don't know. It's really worth it with the change and the seasons, and that's what this music. This is the type of music I start spinning in the springtime. I mean, I spin it year round, but this one has been gracing the turntable a lot here since spring began, and it's just beautiful acoustic guitar sounds, a duo. And of course, they are from here, Eugene, Oregon. This is an older cut. This is a deep cut. I found this in a bargain bin somewhere, and it just blew my mind. And I was like, holy shit! There's two dudes. This album's called Oregon Hill. There's two dudes walking across the park, and there's Skinner's Butte in the background. Here in Eugene, anyone that's from Eugene or been to Eugene, spent any time in Eugene, likes Eugene, whatever. This is a photo of looking south through the Willamette Valley, in the central Willamette Valley, and there's this very, very large butte in Eugene called Skinner's Butte. And this was recorded in the mid-70s, I think like 75, maybe 76. Cutthroat Records. Oh, beg your pardon, I misspoke. It's an 80s release. Cutthroat Records, local, on Adams Street here in Eugene. They used to press records at this tiny little place on Adams Street down in the Whitaker. And these two dudes just playing some folk, hippie guitar stylings. I love it to death. They're very, very good, very professional, play together very well. Those soft hippie sounds of the 70s and 80s, reminiscent of that label I've mentioned before that I love so dearly, Windham Hill Records. Just kind of like hippie, kind of new age, soft jazz. I really dig that shit. A lot of people do too. A lot of people think it's ridiculous. I don't know. This stuff just gives me wonderful feels. Just absolute, you know, mellow, terrific feels. Perfect for a soft spring day when the wind is still chilly, but you're on the back porch because the sun hits your face. And it's like, what's that saying that everyone has here in Oregon? It's like, in, you know, March in Oregon, it's like 90 degrees in the sun and then 40 degrees in the shade, and it's still windy. It could snow tomorrow. You know, what a wonderful place we live in. So, cool little gem. Check out the album Oregon Hill. The gentlemen, sorry I forgot to mention, their names are Richard Crandall and Bill Bartels. So yeah, it's a totally obscure, random, very, you know, small little independent pressing that happened here in Eugene. So everyone check it out. It's fantastic. Okay, moving along. Here's something completely different than that. I mean, I've been listening to this a lot lately because, of course, I love progressive rock. This being, you know, a wonderful example of that. And I was feeling kind of weird and guilty. One of the last lists I did, I was featuring some progressive rock albums, 10 of them to be exact, that I felt were probably the most influential and the most important in rock history. It was just like album after album after album, and they were all British prog rock. And so I needed to bring this out because I have been listening to these guys quite a bit recently, but this happens to be one of my favorite albums of theirs, and they're not British and they're not American. So this is, of course, the Italian master band Goblin, Prog Masters. The album Roller, which is fucking killer. 1976, I believe. It was like, well, it wasn't their first album. I think it was their first like kind of full-length LP that was intended to be like an introductory, hey, this is who we are, kind of their first, you know, introductory album. I think the one, they did one before this. It was the, what is that, Basso Profondo, or whatever. It was a movie soundtrack for that very famous man, the Italian filmmaker that they were doing all the compositions for his films. I can't remember his name, it escapes me, but also very famous for the movie Suspiria, which really, you know, made them hyper famous. So this was before that though. I think, yeah, it's 1976, I believe. Anyway, this one more of kind of just like a straightforward prog rock album. Not intended to be any type of like, you know, latching onto a film of any type, and stands alone, a bit of a masterpiece. I love the sounds, the production on this, the way they got their instruments to sound, really fantastic. God, it reminds me so much of what Rush was doing in the mid-70s when they were just getting their start too. I don't know if maybe these guys were kind of like, they were kind of maybe inspiring each other, or like one or the other maybe kind of took some sounds and some ideas that, you know, one had. I don't know. I kind of have the opinion that Rush is a lot less progressive and a lot less, I guess, just kind of like unique as people like to portend. I mean, they're unique, but I really feel like they got a lot of their inspiration and sound and ideas like from other people and just kind of took it, tweaked it, gave it their own kind of sound. Of course, Geddy Lee, like no one sounds like Geddy Lee, and no one drums like Neil Peart, and no one plays guitar like Alec Lifeson either. But when I listened to this album, like it didn't really hit me until like, I don't know, it was like a few months ago. I put this on again, and I kind of like go through a Goblin phase every now and again. And especially this album, I'm just like, dude, this sounds a lot like 2112, you know, like that era. Like I think it was the same year. It was like 1976, right? And I just got like huge, especially the bass guitar dude. What is his name? Fabio Pignatelli. Um, Dude, both him and Geddy Lee, their bass guitar sound is like almost spot on the same. And then I was thinking about it and I was like, this is 76. Like, I think that's when they did um, Farewell to Kings, maybe. I'm not a huge Rush fan, and so I don't know all the dates of their albums. But yeah, I got just huge Rush vibes, and even Lifeson stylings as opposed to you know Macchio or whatever the fuck his name is. I love these guys, man. Massimo Marante. These Italian dudes. They're so fucking great. Of course, my first, you know, the first time I ever heard these guys was the Suspiria soundtrack. But that shit blew me away, and I was like, oh, thank God. Okay, there's other places in the world that like had like a well of amazing prog rock. That I can just like every now and again I kind of like dive into it. There's a couple other Italian groups, man. That was that Frumpy, I think they're called, or something like that. Man, there's some really great shit out of Italy. So I don't just listen to British and American prog, I promise. Been listening to this a lot lately. So everyone, if you like prog rock, you like this kind of stuff. Very, in my opinion, very similar to what Rush was doing in the mid '70s. Get yourself some Goblin, the album Roller especially. Very, very, very good. All right. Oh man, I'm still feeling just like totally spaced out. I hope this shit passes. It's so weird because it's like I got the shot, felt great for like 2 days, was just doing all kinds of gardening. I was like, I'm feeling strong, and then like yesterday, it just kind of like hit me like a wet sack of smashed assholes. I was just like, oh my god, feeling pretty awful. So I hope this passes. More stuff that I've been listening to that helps me feel better when I'm feeling down in the dumps and I'm feeling like feeling sicky icky. I listen to sweet, subtle sounds of contemporary guitar and piano-centric music. Um, this is a man named Tim Story. Many of you may have heard of him. He is kind of a big shot. He's kind of a big name in the world of new age soft jazz. Specifically, he's a pianist, and so all of the stuff he does is piano-centric. There will be stuff where he injects other people or introduces other players on his albums and such, especially because he was also a Windham Hill artist for many, many years. Not strictly a Windham Hill artist, but when he got signed into the big leagues, that's where he got signed, I believe. It's straight to Windham Hill Records. So he got the William Ackerman and the George Winston and all those guys like backing him up all the time and helping him create music and stuff. But this was a recent reissue this year, 2021, that I picked up. I was just elated because I adore him. I love piano-centric, soft, ambient jazz, and this guy is a master of that. This beautiful artwork, this, recent reissue, I guess he's, getting some real big popularity again, and this is just a fantastic reissue. It just looks beautiful, all kinds of intricate little art here. I don't know if you can see this, but all kinds of interesting little like modulations and things, like very Eno-esque, of like how, it's just like sketches of like his music and the parts of it, and just, kind of like a reminder sheet, a roadmap, so to speak, of like, this track and this is what I do on these parts and this and that. One of his, I think maybe his first album. I'm not sure. It's originally released in 1982, and I think this is when he was a young man. And I read in the liner notes, initially he felt quite embarrassed, actually, as this being kind of like his, freshman attempt at what he really wanted to do and what he wanted to show the world. But I think it's just magnificent. It's very, very cool, very experimental. Maybe he was mildly embarrassed because it is, I wouldn't say a copycat, but it is very, it's very reminiscent of, things like what Brian Eno was doing and a lot of the other, Japanese composers, the contemporaries of that time. So, nonetheless, I think it's very unique. I adore it. His piano stylings are just, yeah, really subtle, very beautiful. Um, and there's a lot of experimental stuff on here too. So it's a little bit for everybody. It's not just straight down the kind of like the boring tinkle tune path. You know, I mean, I love boring tinkle tunes, but that's what I say to my friend in the record store when I go in the record store. Hey man, you got any cool new tinkle tunes for me? And that day in the record store, boy did he. This made my day. I love these tinkle tunes. Anyone that likes tinkle tunes, get yourself some Tim the Story. The album's called Threads. This is a recent reissue just this year. So you can get it. It's only $19.95. I highly recommend it if you like piano-centric, soft jazz, and experimental stuff. Pretty cool. Good shit. Talk about experimental weirdo shit. Here they are again. They poke their noses into every list. Almost every list. They had a new album this year. Came out right as the year cracked through. Here they are again, the Psychedelic Porn Crumpets. I talk about these guys all the time. Not because I'm just like fixated and I think they're the greatest fucking things since sliced bread. They put out a lot of albums. They're doing it. They're putting out one every single year. And I have to get it because I love experimental, psychedelic, rock, crazy fucking cool shit. Again, the artwork is really effing cool. It's that same artist that I've talked about before. I highlighted in numerous videos. This one being a little bit different. A little kind of more like, I'm not going to even try to explain it. I have no idea. Obviously, digital art display. But looks like something that belongs inside a computer. I don't know any other way to describe it. The album itself, the music, after I've been spinning it for maybe a month or two, pretty fucking awesome. It's more of the same great shit. I won't say that it's becoming formulaic. I won't say that it is more of the same. That's not the case. This album, I think, is heavier. It's heavier than their previous stuff. Their previous stuff is kind of just like psychedelic jammy type stuff. This is like, I feel like this is a hard rock album, like borderline. No, I'm not gonna say it. They're not like a stoner psych rock, garage rock. No, they're not turning into a fuzz band like everyone else. No, it's still definitely what they were doing. 3 guitars, guitar rock, jamming, insane-o shit. Pretty cool. But this album, it's way heavier than their previous albums. I'm getting a lot more 90s vibes. I use that term a lot, I guess. This is just, it kind of reminds me of hard rock from the 90s. I can't really give any more of an explanation or a detailed description than that. That's just getting some pretty heavy rock vibes from these guys. They're just getting heavier and weirder. Lead singer, guitar man, still kind of just singing a lot about his struggles with addiction and his struggles with letting shit go. You know, may it be his lifestyle choices, may it be fucking shit problems with women, maybe whatever. He's just having a hard time letting go, which I can relate to. So I always latch on to this kind of stuff. I don't know. The A side is just like, it's fucking hard rock, dude. It's hardcore. That song, Tripolosaur, oh my god, talking about his velvet existence. He's just talking about it. He keeps trying, he keeps fucking up, he keeps going back to his old ways, and he tries again, and he's just falling into a rut. And I know that feeling. I know all too well. And when the titles for their songs are hilarious. Tripolosaur, that's got to be my favorite song on the album so far. And bam, they're doing it. 14, 15 tracks, at least 7 per side, except for the B-side. Interestingly enough, not sure why or how or what was the meaning or cause behind this, but a couple of repeat tracks from the album from late 2019. The album that I've highlighted before, it's called And Now for the Whatchamacallit. The Mundungus song is on here again, and I believe also, or maybe it's just that one. the song called Mango Terrarium. Also, the title sounds familiar. I don't know if it's on that other album though, or maybe it's on like the High Visceral album or one of their other earlier EPs or something like that. But the Mundungus song occurs on their previous album from 2 years ago. So I found that to be kind of strange. I put the B-side on and was like, am I having some sort of weird, like, kind of fucking psilocybin flashback? What's going on here? Anyway, these guys are fan-fucking-tastic. Psychedelic Porn Crumpets, their release. Oh, I forgot to say the name of the album is called Shiga and the Sunlight Mound. They released this first thing this year, January. So yeah, get it. It's pretty fucking awesome. There's a good chance it's probably going to be on my, at least somewhere up there in the top of 2021. Who knows? Maybe, maybe not. There's a lot of stuff that's been released this year that I'm not even highlighting today that I've been listening to that is fucking awesome. So there'll be a chance. You guys will see it. Alright, what's next? Yeah, I can't stop listening to these guys. I love this shit so much. I've talked about it before. This is what I talk about when I get up in the morning and I'm doing my coffee ritual or whatever, and I just need to stare at the wall for a good solid 30 minutes. You know, that's kind of how I do my thing. Before the kids get up, you know, before the world at large wants to kind of like, you know, do its thing. These guys are on my side. They got me, and I love it. Of course, I'm talking again about Stars of the Lid. I've mentioned them before. I think they're a Brit duo. I think they're British. Anyway, this is one of their albums from the 90s. They were actually pretty prevalent in the UK in the 90s when that kind of like, they didn't call it post-rock. I don't know when that fucking term came around. I hate that fucking term. That shit, that term in rock and roll kind of gives me the same weird feeling as the term grunge, you know, like when we were there and we were part of it, we didn't really call it grunge either. It was stupid. We just called it alternative rock, but I hate that word. I hate that word grunge, almost as much as I kind of hate the whole punk thing too, but whatever, it's just rock and roll. And the post-rock thing, it doesn't make any sense to me. And so whenever anyone talks about post-rock band, like I just immediately think about Explosions in the Sky for some reason. And then like the 500 other fucking bands that sound just like Explosions in the Sky. And so I don't like to use that term because there's so much more out there that can be related to, I don't know. I'll stop with the silly explanation anyway. I don't call these guys a fucking post-rock band, but a lot of people do. Anyways, they were doing it in the 90s. This album's from fucking 96 and 97 when they made this. It's called The Ballested Orchestra. That's the name of the album. More just subtle, beautiful, you know, drone-oriented, ambient stuff. Synthesizer, lots of, you know, sound bites and clips and shit punched in. Interesting stuff that you would hear on the streets and the subways, you know, that kind of stuff that's all interjected into this beautiful soundscape, you know, modern day, you know, industrial and city type, you know, soundscape. And it just goes on for, you know, an hour and a half, and it's just subtle beauty, and I adore it. I adore it to death. I think actually maybe this was the introductory album for me into their music. I think I heard this first. I'm not sure exactly where and how. I saw the track listing, and there's some sort of like shout out, some homage track to Twin Peaks. We all, of course, love Twin Peaks. But yeah, the entire side 3 of this, the beginning of the second disc, is all titled Music for Twin Peaks Episode 30, Part 1 and Part 2. And of course, with a little tiny bit of research, or anyone that watched the show or was a part of that growing up or whatever is a huge fan, everyone knows that the original series ends at episode 29. And so this was kind of like a continuation in their mind of like that story and what the music would be, and like, I don't know, it's just kind of artsy, kind of cool, kind of dark, kind of, you know, and that's the whole motif of this album. It's just a lot of interesting, you know, photographs, and the artwork is cool. There's a bunch of pictures of them in Belgium. I don't know, maybe they are from Belgium. It was recorded in Austin, Texas, so I don't fucking know where these guys are from. I had never researched it, and I don't care. The beauty in their music is the relationship that I want to have with them, and that's where it begins and that's where it ends. I have just, this stuff is constantly on my record player, especially in the last couple months. Like I said, toward the end of the winter months here in Oregon, it's just kind of like, oh my God, it just goes on and on and on and on. And you kind of need that sort of like subtle soundtrack in your mind. Like last year at this time, my mother had just died, and I had just began a new job, and I bought $150 pair of earbuds, and I would just put those fucking things in at work, and this is like all I would listen to. And I was just focusing, doing my job, trying to be a collected, centered human being and not fall apart. And these guys helped me not fall apart. They're pretty amazing. So everyone give them a shot. Stars of the Lid. Yeah, this is another one that it's a wild shit. I love this. I can't stop playing it. I keep playing it. Primarily because there's nothing to hinder the enjoyment and the experience of this album. I have made it known many times on these videos and these little chats that I have with you guys how much I adore and kind of need in my life just instrumental music. I listen to, I would say 75%, 80%, you know, primarily my collection of what I spend on a daily basis is instrumental. Nothing ruins music more than some egotistical shithead frontman, or maybe just singing about dumb shit, or just doesn't have a great voice, and it's taken away from the music a lot of the times. Same way I feel about the goddamn tenor saxophone. It's the same thing. It's in that same register. It's in that same, like, you know, wavelength, I guess, for my brain. I don't know. The tenor saxophone, some vocalists. I primarily am listening to instrumental music all the time. And so a lot of what you'll see on my, you know, my channel, my lists, whatever, a lot of it is instrumental shit. And this is some prog rock from the 80s. This is some great middle 80s prog rock. And this is a band from Hungary. It's a Hungarian prog band called Solaris. This is a concept album that these guys made. These Hungarian dudes, pretty fucking cool. I wish I could pronounce any of their names. What an amazing culture. I had to get on the World Wide Web and do some real research about Hungary, because that place seems really fucking interesting, judging just by the music they're making and just how they spell their names and their wacky fucking language, dude. Like, Middle Europe, I don't even understand any of that shit. It's crazy. This band's called Solaris, and the album is called Marsbeli Kronakak. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but it's super fun to say. Marsbeli Kronakak is Hungarian for the Martian Chronicles. Everyone's familiar with, obviously, what the Martian Chronicles is and what it's all about. Wicked cool artwork on the cover. Was drawn immediately to this beautiful artwork and the conceptual idea. I love sci-fi. I love classic sci-fi. I love the Martian Chronicles. And just, you know, the moment you put this on, it's pretty cool. You're taken away. The whole first side is dedicated to, you know, the theme, the Marsbeli Kronakak, you know, part 1 through 3, and then, or excuse me, part 1, then 2 through 3, and then 4 through 6, and just instrumental, just beauty. There's not really, we're not talking like a 4-piece band kind of jamming prog rock here. It's very, very elaborately composed. There's a fuck ton of synthesizer on this. It's almost all just like tons of synth. We're talking 84, And so the synths were getting really good. They were really cool, all those classic synth sounds that these guys, I mean, like I said, I don't speak Hungarian. This shit's really hard to decipher. At least all those Latin-based languages, like, you know what they're talking about. Like, it's pretty easy to decipher what's going on here. But this shit, dude, I can't pronounce their names, let alone, like, this guy plays the zongora, and, you know, this dude plays the dobok. You know, it's like, what are you talking about? I think dobok is probably drums. You know, orgona, that's obviously the, you know, organ. But from what I can gather here, there's one dude that plays like a bunch of screaming awesome guitars, because this shit has some really, really fit for you guitar dudes out there. It's got some really fantastic guitar work. We're talking like, this was '84, so like the guitar work was starting, like they were, I don't know if there was two dudes playing guitar. I don't think so. I think it was one guy, and they were like punching in stuff on the side of him, you know, mirroring and doing harmonies of himself. And like, I'm talking like, this shit is reminiscent of like metal shit, like a lot of the early '80s, like, you know, Megadeth, Metallica, like those cool guitar sounds that they were starting to get in metal music. You know, so this music isn't progressive metal. It is not progressive metal, but it is, like I said, elaborately, you know, organized, and it just they really stitched this shit together pretty awesome, and it's just dripping with tons of synth and keyboards. And so if you're into that kind of stuff, like that prog sound of the '80s, heavy keyboard styling is really cool. And most of it will just be like, you know, composition with some, you know, orchestral stuff and you know, auxiliary percussion instruments and this and that. So we're not talking just like kind of like straightforward rock and roll stylings here. But then they go into that, like every now and again, it's kind of punctuated with just like, oh, suddenly they're going into a groove. You know, it's not, a lot of it's not groove based. And thematically, you know, when they get to the B side, they have, it's like, it goes into like a whole new kind of like part of the I don't know if they're trying to really tell the tale of the Martian Chronicles, but it goes into like this kind of like apocalyptic, kind of weird, kind of like, it's hard to explain, but I feel like the A side and the B side, musically speaking, maybe not like, you know, interpretively, you know, literally, the way you interpret it. I'm thinking more on a musical scale. They kind of mirror each other. The A side kind of mirrors the B side. They just are very reminiscent of each other. And I kind of like that. I kind of like putting on the A side, you get the grand tale, and you flip it over to Lato B, you know, and you're getting kind of like another part of the story, but it kind of feels like it's just, you know, the second chapter. I don't know. It's I didn't do a very good job of explaining it, but it just, the album plays out like you're reading a story, and it's fantastic. It's really, really, really good. So anyone that, you know, has a little bit of proggy love running through their blood, get this album, Solaris, The Martian Chronicles, or Mars Belli Chronikak. I'll keep saying that every now and again. I fucking love that shit. Alright. Oh man, I'm super loopy. Go out and get your shit. Get the Pfizer, get the Moderna, get them both. I don't give a shit. We gotta get back to like being able to go to see shows and like see bands and like give them your shekels and like do this thing. We gotta get there. So I want to share a few more records with you guys. Appreciate you letting me be all loopy at you. This is one that is near and dear to my heart, that, you know, these make their way out of the dusty confines of the lower shelf a lot, because, like I said, I have a huge place in my heart for these guys. I've talked about them before. I have all their albums, always have. Well, not all their albums, but I have all their main releases, like their major releases. And this one, it's just like, I'm not going to say it's my favorite of theirs, but it gets pulled up so much, dude. It's so fucking good. It's so underrated. And it was right there at that like kind of like turning point in their career. A lot was changing for them, and it was kind of like, you know, are we going to keep doing this? Are we going to, you know, kind of cash in our chips? Like, what are we going to do? I don't know. Of course, you all probably realize now I'm talking about Pearl Jam. Probably my favorite rock band of all time. This album is super, super important to me. It's fan-fucking-tastic. It totally flew way under the radar. Everyone was like way over these guys by the time it came out. This came out in 2000, so they had just gotten to the point where they had been a band for like 10 years. And it's like when you're a band for a decade, and they had already been through like 4 drummers, you know, it's like, what are we gonna do? This album is just so important. People had totally just given up on them. They're like, fucking Pearl Jam's old news. Nobody gives a shit anymore. They took a little bit of a breaky poo, I think, from like 98 for like a year. I don't think they played any shows. I don't know that much about it because I was out of high school. I was like going to college. I had almost kind of forgotten about Pearl Jam, and I was like, oh, were they just a part of my childhood or whatever? And then they dropped this shit. They got Matt Cameron on drums. Huge, gigantic move for them. Jack Irons, you know, being their primary drummer for like the last part of the 90s. Also kind of a reason why a lot of people say that they kind of fell off with Pearl Jam. They weren't really appreciating or liking maybe the kind of more, you know, kind of like roots rock, organic styles that Jack Irons was bringing the band. He wasn't a very busy player. He wasn't a very highly technically proficient player, but I feel like he had brought like a lot of good juju to the band, and that's what they needed. Because I think he was a long-standing friend with Eddie Vedder. I think they hung out and grew up in the same circle of friends in Southern California. Because Jack Irons was one of the original drummers for the Red Hot Chili Peppers, I think, wasn't he? Something like that. They have some sort of weird connection. Anyway, I'm just way long-winded and stupid about this. I shouldn't be. They finally got Matt Cameron. They convinced Matt Cameron to join. Soundgarden broke up, and everyone went their own ways. And Matt Cameron was the drummer from Soundgarden. Insanely fucking great drummer. Well, I'm not doing anything. You guys need a drummer? Cool. Let's keep this Pearl Jam project going on. Anyway, this was the first album that Matt Cameron drummed with them. It's fucking phenomenal. It's amazing. There's just a dozen fantastic hits on this album that never saw the light of day. Of course, they never graced the radio waves, you know, but no one knows any of these songs, you know. Some Pearl Jam fans don't even fucking know any of this music. It's fucking fantastic. The opening to the album, Breaker Fall, I mean, that shit kills, dude. God's Dice, Evacuation, all these songs, every single song on this album is bad fucking ass. Nearing the end of the album, it gets soft, and it just has so many great songs. Totally underwritten, totally underrated album. I've been bringing this one out a lot lately because I love to relive those years. I remember when I first heard this, and I found out that Matt Cameron was drumming for them. I was just like, this is just fantastic. So, I don't know if I've mentioned it. Of course, I probably have, like in a few like kind of sideways type ways. But I'm a drummer. I grew up playing the drums, and so I kind of instinctively latch on to things. I latch on to bands that have fantastic drummers, and Matt Cameron is one of those. Not only is he an incredibly talented, amazing songwriter, he writes songs for Pearl Jam. He still does to this day. They've released 6, 7 albums since this album. And he writes at least 1 or 2 songs on every single one of those. He wrote like at least 4 of these songs. He's an amazing songwriter. Most people don't know that he wrote a ton of shit when he was in Soundgarden. Spoon Man, he fucking wrote that song. He's written a lot of shit. And, you know, popular culture, rock and roll history culture, you know, alternative rock of the 90s, like, would not sound the way it sounded if it wasn't for Matt Cameron of Soundgarden. So, thank goodness for Matt Cameron. Thank goodness for Pearl Jam. This album especially, I don't think I mentioned the name of the album. It's called Binaural. Binaural. 2000, the year 2000. This shit is loaded with all kinds of incredibly gorgeous artwork. This was the first time humankind had gotten images of this sort back from space, from the Hubble Space Telescope. The Hubble Space Telescope started sending back images of like whatever this is, some sort of like nebula from, you know, however many fucking millions of light years away or whatever. There's you know, huge giant color photography in here of all those things, like the Pillars of Creation and the Horsehead Galaxy and just, you know, or the Horsehead Nebula or whatever it's called, the Crab Nebula and all that shit. Just gorgeous, just amazing. I like the concept and the art of this album a lot. So yeah, I'll stop babbling about this. Get Pearl Jam's binaural, pretty badass. Okay, we're coming to the end here, and again, I'll apologize if this has all seemed a little bit incoherent and silly. Struggling, but I'll get through it. This week was a little bit much for me to handle. But this is important, you know. I need this music. This is what I've been spinning. This is a part of me. I like to be able to just kind of share what I'm listening to for you guys and what it means to me. So thanks for bearing with me. This one's huge. I've been listening to Genesis a lot in the last year, basically. When I first started listening to progressive rock, you know, whatever, like 10 years ago, for some reason I didn't latch on to Genesis right away. Maybe I kind of wrote them off as like not being like a real progressive band or whatever, because I was only really familiar with the latter part of the Genesis catalog, and then all of, you know, what Phil Collins was doing and stuff like that. And so I was kind of just like, yeah, I guess it's prog, but I don't know. I knew of the Gabriel Years, but I didn't investigate them thoroughly enough. So I didn't get into Genesis like really heavily right away. I didn't start getting into Genesis heavily until just maybe about like 5 years ago. But I'm still kind of like really absorbing it, and so they're on my turntable a lot, and especially this one. This one, I believe, is probably one of their more underrated albums that people don't give enough clout to. I think it's fan-fucking-tastic. This is, you know, huge one for Phil Collins really breaking out as being, you know, the man behind, you know, the Genesis. We're talking Wind and Wuthering. This has like some of my favorite Genesis songs on it. What's the second to last? In That Quiet Earth. That song is absolutely a thing of beauty. This has some really phenomenal tracks on it. I like the vibe it has, the ambience it has. I love this art. People talk shit about this art. They talk shit about the sound of it. I don't know. I think this album's fan-fucking-tastic. You know, The 11th Earl of Mar, duh, and One for the Vine. Those three songs right there. 11th Earl of Mar, One for the Vine, and In That Quiet Earth. Those are like three of my favorite Genesis songs. Bam, all on this album. This shit I've been throwing it up there a lot. It's so great. Anyone that's a Genesis fan, take this for another drive. You know, if you're on the fence, or if you're not sure, or if you're like, oh, I've only really ever listened to the Gabriel Years, or whatever your excuse is, this one should be getting a lot. This is like 1976, so it wasn't Phil Collins' first, you know, in the limelight. I think Trick of the Tail was, right? Trick of the Tail is badass. That album's fucking insane. And I always, when I think of like when Collins took over, that's initially what I gravitate towards, just Trick of the Tail, because it has, you know, just Dance on a Volcano and just all those really, really monumental fucking tracks. This one always just kind of gets shuffled aside by people. I don't know why. I really think it's just, like I said, a thing of beauty. So everyone listen to Wind and Wuthering, 1976 by Genesis. Really super fantastic. Okay, well, this is the end. I wanted to punctuate this video with something a little more somber than maybe, you know, most of you would like, but it is what it is. People leave us, and it's shitty when they do, but we're always grateful and we're always glad for what they provide and what they do for, you know, the earth and our existence while they're here. I didn't learn of this gentleman's death until just recently, until just about maybe 2 weeks ago. And for some reason, I have to mention it. I want to mention it. I was like, maybe I should mention it in the video. So I just am. My collection is riddled with his beautiful take on, the human existence and how he interpreted it. Talking about the man Harold Budd. Harold Budd died in December, late last year. I didn't learn of it until just recently, but yeah, he died in December. I believe he was born in somewhere in the early to mid 40s, I think. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact days. I think somewhere in the early 40s, 1943, I want to say. So he lived to be into his late 60s. And I think it was COVID that took him. He was having some complications with health problems. He was aging. But then upon being checked into a goddamn hospital, he got fucking COVID, and it took him. Anyone that doesn't know the name will probably understand now that, being associated with the name Brian Eno, synonymous, those two, collaboratively, and just, throughout all those years in the late 70s and early to mid 80s, they were like, two peas in a pod. Him being a piano master. Brian Eno, I believe I saw a quote somewhere saying he was an amazing pianist stuck or trapped in a surrealist painter's body or something. Oh, damn it, I slaughtered the quote, but it's a really great quote comparing him to truly being like a real artist, just a painter of music and colors, because I'm sure he also probably painted, but that's what his playing was like. It was like, surreal and abstract, paint on canvas. When I think Harold Budd, I mean, we all know of, the music that he made with Cockatoo Twins, The Moon and the Melodies, that album, and then of course his, beautiful stylings that he added to a couple of Eno's albums. The Discreet Music, he played a lot of backing stuff on the Discreet Music album that Eno put out in 79, I think, 78, 79. No, maybe it was later. But all of these albums were just all kind of smashed together. They were just like putting out all kinds of shit because they kind of like co-created like a record label together. And of course, his beautiful musings on Eno's second ambient album. He even got liner credits on the top. The Plateau of Mirror album, just phenomenal. But when I think Harold Budd, I think that real, they call it like soft pedal piano or whatever. I'm not a pianist, so I don't understand the technicalities of it, but I can kind of get what they're talking about. What he reminds me of is just kind of like, like a detuned, not detuned, but like an out of tune practice room piano. Anyone that has like been around or grown up or participated in like community theater or anything like that, you have the green room or like the warm-up room or like the costume room where everyone kind of like da, 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 does their warming up, and there's always that shitty old like 85-year-old fucking piano in there that has never been tuned, because no one in a community theater is gonna fucking pay a dude to come tune that piano. It's very expensive. So there's just this like shitty out of tune piano, and it rings to high heaven because the pedals are broken. That sounds so interesting and weird to put it that way, but that's what Harold Budd's playing reminds me of. It's just that really kind of like airy, ethereal, beautiful kind of like broken piano. You know what I mean? Like that's everyone's soul. That's what everyone's soul kind of sounds like. That's what everyone's heart kind of sounds like, is Harold Budd's piano. It's like barely working, can still play a tune. You can still recognize, and it still has a lot of beauty and a lot of worth. His playing and his persona and everything he did was just mystical and magical to me. I've owned all his albums. I have the Pearl album. The first album he ever did. I think this is like another kind of like piece of like music, popular culture history that has been interpreted and kind of the story told so many different ways. A lot of it's probably not true, but I think this is his first album was recorded by Brian Eno secretively in like Brian Eno's home. Like he just had Harold Budd over, and they probably just like were getting drunk or whatever, just chilling, hanging out. And I think he asked like Harold to play piano for him in his home, and he secretively went over like behind like a stanchion or something like that and pressed record on whatever situation he had going, wired into his home, mic'd up, microphones in the plants or some shit like that. I don't know, but I remember reading that, and that's how that whole, what is that album called? Damn it. Anyway, I can't remember the title of the album, but that was Harold Budd's first breakthrough album. Was that secretively recorded by Brian Eno. So really, really amazing. Lovely Thunder, another fantastic album. I believe I want to say like later in the 80s, I think like 87. I think the whole B-side is all just like one long, just, oh God, just surreal. That guy will be missed. Guy was a beautiful player. Anyone that appreciates piano music. He was a legend. A legend. My favorite of his is an album called The White Arcades. Everyone go pick up The White Arcades by Harold Budd. A little bit darker, a little bit kind of more like a foggy dream, kind of lower tones, darker tones, more subtle, smokier. This is my favorite of all his works. So, if anyone's not familiar, you should be. Ambient piano master genius. So, rest in peace, Harold Budd. All right, everyone. Thanks again for tuning into my channel.